recall a few years ago there was a story going around to this effect about a little girl who was told by her parents to pray because there had been so many misfortunes and sufferings in the family. And so the little child prayed and said, "Dear Lord, my brother has the mumps, my sister fell off the bicycle and broke her leg, and my older brother has pneumonia, and Daddy lost his job. So dear God, please take care of yourself, because if anything happens to you, we'll all be in the soup."
Travel along, Catholic pilgrims, for 1 year as we learn from Venerable Fulton Sheen, one of the greatest Catholic teachers in modern times. Join me, Amy Thomas, once a week for a short reading out of Bishop Sheen's book, Way to Inner Peace. All right, Catholic pilgrims, welcome back to week 14. This week we're going to be talking about the mystery of suffering, and it's probably one of the central reasons why people either leave their faith or don't come into the faith at all, is because they cannot wrap their mind around why a God who's supposed to be all-loving could allow any type of suffering. And it's definitely one of those issues that I think we all wrestle with at some time in our lives. And I think God is okay with us wrestling with that. I think He wants us to come to Him with our struggles with understanding suffering and bring our questions and bring our doubts and all of that to Him. I think sometimes we're afraid to do that. Like, God's not big enough to handle those kinds of questions, and so we just don't, and then we either drop God or we don't come to Him at all because of the suffering that may be happening in our own lives or in the lives of people around us. And so Bishop Sheen obviously is going to have some wonderful things to say. I think it's important to remember that suffering is something that we are never meant to fully understand in this lifetime. And Bishop Sheen is going to talk about that at the very beginning of our readings. So let's get started. The 3 points I want you to hone in on are pure sufferings, impure sufferings, and sacrifice. Number 14, mystery of suffering. God breathes on us in our joys. He whispers in our conscience. He speaks in our troubles, and He shouts in our pains. Suffering is too great a mystery for reason to fully comprehend its meaning. Its understanding demands a loftiness of soul and surrender of spirit which few are prepared to make. Pain and suffering seem to be closely linked up with the cosmos itself, as if by some great free decision on our part, the peace and concord of life were disturbed. Our solar system itself began with some great travail and labor of a major disturbance. Our own planet had its ice age, with great waters vomiting themselves through hills and mountains, and our earth has its tumultuous change of seasons. When we consider the human condition, we find that there are 2 kinds of sufferings, the pure and the impure. The impure pains are those which come from without through no fault of our own, such as plagues, disease, accidents, etc. Pure pain is that which comes from ourselves, such as physical pain resulting from an abuse of the laws of health, excesses in drinking or worries, anxious fears caused by violations of the moral law. It must never be thought that because one suffers, therefore one is guilty or is being punished. In a general way, the disorders and evils of the world do follow from man planting a rebel's flag against the Creator, but it can never be said in any individual case the suffering was due to personal guilt. The Christ who died on the cross did nothing wrong. The innocent can suffer as well as the guilty. More important is the question, what can one do in the face of pain and suffering? Various solutions have been offered. One is stoicism, which is to grit one's teeth and bear it in order to prove apathy and indifference to the ills of the world. Another way is that of Buddhism, which is to see all suffering as the result of desire. As one crushes desire and strives for union with the great nirvana of unconsciousness, One diminishes and finally conquers suffering. The Old Testament, as revealed in the book of Job, is to acknowledge that we are face to face with a mystery which is incapable of solution by reason. When Job asks God questions, God appears and begins asking Job questions such as, "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth?" When God finished asking Job questions, Job realized that the questions of God made more sense than the answers of men. Job's final philosophy was summed up in his words, "Slay me though he might, I will trust in him." Job 13:15. The Christian answer is that evil is due basically to sin. Hence, the way to conquer suffering is to conquer sin. To do so, the Son of God took on himself a human nature. Identifying himself with us, he took on also our guilt as a father takes on the debts of a wayward son. Being human, he could suffer as one of us and in our name. Being God, his sufferings would have infinite value and blot out all the debts we owed. The resurrection was the final manifestation that the love of God is stronger than the power of sin. If pain and suffering were insoluble, the Heavenly Father would never have fitted it into the pattern of his divine Son. The lesson is that perfection is attained through work, sacrifice, and self-denial. Sometimes it is self-imposed, and at other times imposed by others. Then it becomes necessary to patiently bear the cross in love of him who died for us. A mother gives a child bitter medicine. Though the child protests, he knows it comes from a loving hand and for his own good. Love cannot extinguish suffering, but it can diminish it, as love makes an all-night vigil by her sick child seem less hard. Where there is this assurance that love suffered for us to atone for our sins, we can find peace in resigning ourselves to the divine will. As Dante said, "In his will is our peace." Franz Werfel, continuing that idea, gave this motto to peacemakers: not revenge, but expiation; not punishment, but penance. As I said in the beginning, here on earth, we are never going to fully understand the sufferings of this world. It is a mystery, much like the Blessed Trinity and the Incarnation and, even the Holy Eucharist. Those are all great mysteries. And suffering is also one of those things that goes into that group. We might kind of get it at some points. Like for me, there's times when the Trinity, I'll have it in my head for like a half a second and I'll be like, yes, I've got it. And then it goes away and, I lose that clear grasp I just had. Sometimes that happens with suffering as well. There's moments where I'm like, yes, I get it. And then it just kind of goes away. And that's because it's a mystery and we don't have God's mind and we can't fully understand all that goes into these mysteries. And so if we try in this lifetime to figure them out, it's just not going to happen. And that doesn't mean we don't, have faith in God and trust in what he has revealed to us, but we also have to realize our limits as human beings. So that's why I like what Bishop Sheen says here at the very beginning of our readings. He says, "Suffering is too great a mystery for reason to fully comprehend its meaning. Its understanding demands a loftiness of soul and surrender of spirit, which few are prepared to make." And I think some of the saints probably reached that loftiness or do reach that loftiness. But I want to focus on those two types of sufferings or pains that he talks about, the impure and the pure. And with the impure, I want to tell you a couple of stories about my own daughters. So my oldest, she was a competitive gymnast. And when we lived in Virginia the first time, she had a fantastic gym. I mean, we couldn't have had a better gym home. Her coaches were just amazing. The gym was great. She had friends. The parents of her teammates were, my husband and I's friends. It all gelled. It all fit. It was so good. And it just felt like a little community. Well, we got uprooted from Virginia and we had to move to Las Vegas, which was our hardest move. And I think I've talked about that before. When we got to Vegas, we had to get my daughter into a gym. And Vegas is very big, and there are a lot of gyms in the area, but none that were very close to where we were living, and it would take a long time to get to the other gyms. So we settled on one that had pretty good reviews and was in a good location for us to drive nearly every day. We got to the gym, and it was big, and it was Vegas, and the coach was, let's just say, not my favorite, to be nice. It was a very, very difficult transition. My daughter had gone from being with best friends to this kind of very sterile environment. Vegas just has kind of a sterile feel to me. And the gym had that kind of feel. Plus, she was a teenager at this time. And you know how it is with teenagers. Trying to bust into friend groups can be very difficult at that time. And not long after we got there and she was involved in this gym, one day she just came out crying. And she was just missing her old gym. And Virginia, this just wasn't the same. And it wasn't the same for our entire family. I never connected with the parents. The gym never felt like a really close-knit community. And it was just hard. It was very hard. But my daughter wanted to stick it out. She was at a higher level now, and she really wanted to keep going with this. As time went on, she developed a injury that kind of set her back a lot. And, I kept asking her, do you want to try another sport? Do you want to maybe find another gym? That's going to be hard because they're all far away. And she said no. And the coach was getting worse and worse. She was an unhealthy woman, and her being around teenagers and children was unwise and unhealthy. We had to have parent meetings with the owner. I mean, it was a struggle. And she did not treat my daughter well at all. And the mother in me wanted to just take her out of that situation because she was suffering. This was a real case of impure sufferings. Nothing that she had done wrong, but she was suffering. And I wanted to take that pain away from her. But then at the same time, she was at that age where I needed to let her make this decision on her own, whether or not she wanted to walk away from gymnastics. And I would ask her and she would say no. And she just persevered. And she found a way to deal with this coach that just treated her terribly. And she fought through a very weird injury that even the doctors weren't quite sure what to do with. And she just kept at it. And she kept a smile on her face. And her dad and I kept telling her, just persevere. Do the best that you can. Don't let her win. Don't let this beat you down. Keep going. Keep going. If this is what you want to do. If you don't want to do it, that's fine. But if you want to, keep going. Power through the suffering. She finally made it out of the injury, and the coach finally did leave, and she got a much better coach. But our time in Vegas was growing short. And she made it to regionals, and Western regionals, and she was a level 8. And her father was not able to go to the Western regionals because our other daughter had something to go to. And so my daughter and I made the trip up to Reno, Nevada for the Western Regional Gymnastics competition. It was a very special trip. We drove up there, we sang songs on the radio, we passed through ghost towns that we laughed about and talked about. The desert of Nevada can be very weird, and that's another story. Anyway, we get to the competition, and she is doing just so well. It's very impressive. I am excited for her. There's a ton of girls there. And just watching my daughter perform all these very difficult skills and just thinking about how hard she fought, my mama heart was just swelling with pride. And I was just so proud of her. A lot of times when I was at gymnastics meets, I didn't want to know the final outcomes because I like to be surprised when the awards came up. And so I really didn't look at any of the scores. So I had no idea what the outcome was going to be. And we're standing there and we're in the awards, area, and all the parents are packed in there. and they're calling out names for my daughter's, level and everything. And as it keeps going on, I'm realizing, oh my gosh, Rihanna might win this whole dang thing. Now you have to remember it's for her age group and her level. So not for everybody who's a gymnast at level 8 in Nevada or in the Western region. And anyway, for her level and for her age range. And she kept winning and winning. And then the next thing I know, she's getting the medal for the overall winner. And I was just so proud. I mean, I knew she had done well, but I didn't know how her scores compared to anybody else's scores. And so it was such a wonderful surprise. And she got up there and she looked at me and she had this just peaceful smile. Just like, I did it, Mom. I did it. And I was teary-eyed and I was fumbling around trying to take pictures and then trying to tell my husband that she'd won all around. And it was such a good moment. When we got back to Las Vegas after that, she decided to retire and hang up her Leo. And I was a little shocked at first. And my husband said, I'm not surprised at all. I was like, really? And he said, no, I think she set out to do something. She powered through all this that she's gone through. And I think she went out on top. And now looking back on that day in that room when she won the all around and she gave me that smile, it was a smile of, I did it and I'm proud of myself and I can let this go now. And she decided she wanted to try another sport, something different, something new for her senior year. But I was so proud of her for powering through. I mean, these are moments where as parents, sometimes you just have to step back and let them feel the pain and let them find their way through it and be there with them. But now I want to turn, the story to my other daughter. When we were in Turkey, it was her sophomore year, and obviously in Turkey she didn't get to run cross country or track. That just wasn't available there. And she was looking forward to when we got back to the States, she could get back on a cross country team, get back to a track team and run and all that. Well, one night in November, she was like, oh, Mom, can you rub my back? I was like, yeah. So I started rubbing her back. And as I was rubbing her back, I was like, your spine is going off to the right. This is not right. And I felt it some more. And sure enough, I was like, oh my gosh, her spine is really bent. I had my husband feel it and we were like, well, we're going to have to get her seen right away. This is not okay. And her shoulder blade had always kind of stuck out and I could see now why her spine was pushing into it. So we took her to the hospital in Turkey. That's a whole nother experience when you go to a hospital in a foreign country. It was a very good hospital. She had very good care there. And sure enough, she had scoliosis, pretty advanced scoliosis, and she was going to need surgery. And so this threw us for a loop. You don't expect to have a 1-year tour in a foreign country and then have one of your children have major surgery. And so we were like, do we go back to the States? Do we stay here? What in the world do we do? This is insane. Do we wait till we, move back, or do we just fly back and have this taken care of? It was a very upheaval time in our lives, and we were really trying to figure out how do we keep our family together, yet how do we get her the best care. And thankfully, one of the top 3 back surgeons in the whole world is in Istanbul, Turkey. Imagine that. And so we went up to visit with him. He spoke very good English. He had actually done a lot of his residency in the Kansas City area, which is where I'm from. And so that in my mind was like a godsend to me. I was like, oh, this man knows my area. Therefore, he must be really great. I don't know. It just seemed like a sign to me that everything was going to be okay. And so she was scared to death. Just scared to death. I mean, the day we came back from getting the x-rays that showed she had scoliosis, my husband was doing some training, and the whole ride back to our apartment, she had kind of held it in, but once she kind of collapsed into her daddy's arms, she just started crying, and she was so scared of what was looming in front of her. She didn't know if she'd be able to run again or do any sports again, and it was frightening for her. It was scary for us as parents. Anyway, she ended up having that surgery. It was 11 hours. It was excruciatingly long time to have your child under and having surgery done. But everything worked out wonderful. The surgery was a success. Her back is as straight as it can possibly be. But she had a long road to recovery. And there was a lot of suffering. I mean, there were days when she could, barely move from chair to bed without a lot of pain and without getting tired. And, it was just a long recovery. And I had to continually remind her, you went through something very dramatic on your body. You're going to have to give yourself time and be patient. But I'm telling you again, my mama heart just swelled because I saw her day after day, little by little. She would do little exercises to just try to strengthen herself. And she would want to take a walk a little farther every day. And there was this kind of 6th floor patio in our apartment that was pretty big. And we would take her out there and she would just slowly walk laps until she was exhausted. And then we'd take her back up to the apartment and she would collapse in the chair and fall asleep. But every day she wanted to do something to improve herself. And today she has impressed me so much. She's on a track team and she's running amazingly well. She does a special training with my brother, who's a physical trainer, to strengthen her back. And I just am in awe of my children because they have taken this suffering and they have just put all of themselves into it and said, you are not going to beat me. I am going to beat you back. And it just is amazing to see. And again, as a mother, I want to take that pain away from her. And I want to tell her, don't try too hard. But then at the same time, she knows her limits. She's 17 years old. I can't baby her anymore. And I have to let her find her way through the suffering. And she has. And she's been successful. And she's running again. And you would never know that a year ago she had major back surgery. And so all of us are going to have these impure sufferings happen to us. He says the impure sufferings are things that are no fault of our own, such as plagues and disease and accidents. They're just going to come because we live in a fallen world. The pure pains, though, come from ourselves. And if you remember what we talked about last time in the podcast, I had a lot of pure sufferings. Now, I had a lot of pure sufferings because of the choices that I made after impure sufferings because of somebody else, because of other people. But I chose negative ways to try to cope with that suffering, and it only compounded the suffering. And like I said before from our last podcast, I threw myself into, trying to numb the pain through, just the excesses of life and abandoning God. I thought I could do it all on my own. An unchaste life, parties, those types of things. I was trying to find temporary relief for the sufferings. And I wasn't getting up every day and saying, today I'm going to try to make myself better, like I've seen my daughters do. I was just wallowing in my pity, and I just continued to do things that made me feel even worse about myself, which is so sad. But Bishop Sheen goes on to talk about, there's all the ways that people try to power through suffering. He says, there's stoicism, which we just grit our teeth and bear it. That's not healthy. We do need to acknowledge that we're suffering and not just ignore the pain and try to be indifferent to it. That's not healthy. And then he goes on to talk about Buddhism, which is where we see all suffering as the result of desire in some way. And so we just try to crush that desire and then we'll reach nirvana. And that just doesn't seem like a workable solution either. And then he gets to Job. And Job is the book to read if you are going through some suffering. Especially if you are very innocent and it's suffering that you have not caused yourself. Reading Job, you're going to find somebody that you can relate to. And the thing we see in Job is that, yes, suffering happens to the innocent. And it does happen to the guilty as well. Sometimes the choices that we make cause us to suffer. And Bishop Sheen talks about that. He says the Christian answer to that evil is basically due to sin. If you don't want to suffer a lot, conquer sin, because sin causes a lot of suffering in the world. But in the book of Job, Job is innocent, and he has everything bad happen to him that can possibly happen. And yet he never abandons God, and he just keeps trusting and having faith. He doesn't always understand why this is happening or why God would allow this. And he does. He asks questions. He's like, what is going on? Why is this happening? And like Bishop Sheen says, God just asks him questions back. Mostly because we just can't always fully understand what is going on. And so we have two choices in suffering. We really do. We can either allow it to make us bitter and pity ourselves and woe is me and become overly negative and just kind of give up on life. Or we can do what my daughters did, and we can just lean into the suffering and every day fight to be better and to say, no, you're not going to beat me. You're not going to make me into a cynical, bitter person. I will rise above this with God's help. I will not let this suffering destroy my joy. I mean, that's the answer. Those are the two choices. And you have to make those whenever you're going through something truly hard. And here at the very end, he says, the lesson is that perfection is attained through work, sacrifice, and self-denial. Because my oldest daughter was willing to work hard, she sacrificed, and she even had some self-denial. She was able to attain, that victory, that high level of victory of winning the Western Regionals for her level and age. My middle child, she worked hard. Gosh, she sacrificed so much, and she denies herself a lot of comfort in order to better herself. And because of that, she is back. She is back doing what she loves and doing it well and getting better every day. But I love what he says here at the very end. He says, love cannot extinguish suffering, but it can diminish it, as love makes an all-night vigil by her sick child seem less hard. And this is something for all of us to remember. When we see our loved ones going through suffering, or we see even a stranger who's suffering, love is what makes it seem less hard. That is what diminishes the pain. And that's why it's so important that, we support those who are suffering, that we reach out to those who are suffering. We all want somebody to come and, have that quote unquote all night vigil with us during our dark times. And so we need to make sure that we are doing that. That's about all me and my husband could do when our daughters were going through these things. We could make certain decisions for them as their parents, but just watching them push through the suffering, about all that we could do was just love them through it, encourage, be there, and hope that diminished, all the pain and all the hardships that they were striving to get through. And so the way to inner peace in our lives is that when we are going through sufferings, is to not abandon God, as I did many times in my life, but to lean into the sufferings, ask God to come into those sufferings. He truly does understand our sufferings. We have a God that understands. And then every day, get up and say, even though I'm going through this trial, how can I be a better person? I really think that is the key. But that is all for this week, Catholic Pilgrims. I will see you back here for week 15. And until then, live the faith boldly and travel well.